Kia ora, and welcome to the fourth and final webinar of the Connect and Develop series for 2023. I am Peter Papagiannis, Alumni Relations Manager at the University of Auckland, and it has been an exceptional year for Connect and Develop, with over 1,200 alumni and students registering for the 4 talks, and we can't wait to see you all next year for more incredible speakers and topics that will help you develop your personal and career growth. And of course, we thank everyone who has joined us this year and to all of our great speakers who have volunteered their time. And now for the task at hand. Today, we are going to tackle the topic of finance and more specifically, building your financial foundations. Our speaker is alumna and financial force of nature, Hannah McQueen. Hannah was recognized in 2017 as one of the University of Auckland's 40 under 40 inspiring alumni. I encourage you all to tap into Hannah's amazing wealth of expertise via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please submit your questions at any time and upvote the questions you find most interesting. Thank you all again for joining us today. And now, without further delay, I'll hand over to our speaker, Hannah McQueen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. We're going to talk about building your financial foundations today. We've got a little bit of admin to get through first. I'm going to be taking questions and answers at the end. So if you do want to post anything in the chat or the Q&A buttons, please do so below. I guess money is a funny thing, right? It makes people do funny things at the very least. Often our money behaviors aren't talked about or diagnosed accurately, which means we can keep doing things that create a perverse outcome for our own financial future. Today, I want to talk generally about how we can overcome some of these things. The advice I'm going to be giving is, as I say, general in nature. I would encourage you to have a session with one of our amazing financial advisors where it will be more tailored to your situation. But we're going to talk about the importance of financial resilience, the pillars of financial success, your financial BMI, debt repayment. If you have money, do you invest? Do you reduce debt? Should you still buy a property? Like, these are some of the things that we get asked depending on where you're at in your financial life stages. And then I'm going to give you some key takeaways before I get to the Q&As. I think that the interesting thing with money is that it's getting harder to become financially successful. And so what that means is that some of the things that our parents did or our grandparents did to be financially successful, that's not relevant to us now. And if you were just trying to carry forward some of these lessons that you might have learned from the past, in most instances, it's not going to be enough to get you ahead. And I think we've got to recognize that if we're actually going to change things up a little bit. So my background is I'm a chartered accountant. I've got my master's in tax. When I was young, I was voted Young Accountant of the Year. I have a personality. I'm financially literate. I'm financially confident, but I am also a shopper. And what that means is I find it easier to spend money rather than save. In fact, I'm not really even motivated by money. I just want to have enough money so I don't even need to worry about money. That's how I sit. And what you're going to learn today is that your behavioral tendencies around money, so the behavioral economics behind you, has more of an impact of where you're going to end up financially than what you earn. Which is interesting because 2 generations ago, it very much was about make sure you get a good job, that you earn a lot of money, and that should be enough to make sure you're okay in the end. If I think of my granddad, he left school at age 11 to go and work on a farm. He was able to buy his first home at age 20, not because he was particularly amazing, but because the income to house prices was so much closer than what it is today. So what that means is, let's say he earned $50,000, a property cost $100,000, so it was only twice his annual income. It was viable for him to save a deposit quite easily, to purchase that property very early, and in fact to be mortgage free by the time he was 30, not because he was amazing, but because the debt levels he had to wear relative to his income levels were a lot closer than what they are today. Income was 1 and debt was 2 times the level of income. If you go to my parents' generation, it was 1 to 4. So house prices are now 4 times your annual income. If you go to my generation, it's 1 to 6. If you go to my kids' generation, it's 1 to 7 or 8. So back in the day, my grandma would have said, well, if you spend less than you earn and if you delay your gratification, you will be okay in the end. And they could say that because it was true. Whereas today, even if you spend less than you earn, if you don't accompany that with the right strategy that probably needs to overcome your own tendencies, you're not going to end up where you need to. And I have built a business around solving that problem for my clients. And my clients range in age from 18 through to 80. Some of them are just getting started. Some of them are trying to hang up their gloves. Some don't have much money. Some have a lot of money. But everyone is wanting to be better than what they are naturally on track to do. We know that 97% of Kiwis are actually concerned about the cost of living. I understand that, right? You understand that. But that is such a tiny component to the amount of wealth you need to create in your lifetime. Yes, it makes it harder, but just because it's harder doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means you need to be better. There needs to be less inefficiencies with how you run your money, how you grow your money. And we need to be focusing on that so we can offset some of these other challenges, because there will always be challenges when it comes to making financial progress. I know that 95% of Kiwis don't have a plan to ensure they will be okay in retirement. That is a problem. And ironically, even those with a plan are still on track to be running out of money quite quickly as well. Not ideal. We know that for Gen Zs and millennials, that most can't access $5,000 within a week. We know that most do not have enough funds to fund their lifestyle for the necessary 6 months if they were to lose their income. Now, the impact of being worried about your money or not being able to get ahead, well, that permeates. We know that financial stress is one of the leading causes of relationship breakdown. It's one of the leading causes of insomnia. It impacts your decision making. It impacts your productivity at work. Someone who is financially stressed uses 13 hours a month dealing with their finances inadvertently at work. The cost of a financially stressed employee is more than $10,000 a year. And you know, the ironic thing, the employee thinks, well, I just need to earn more money and I will be okay. But if you, as you earn more money, what tends to happen is your lifestyle usually just creeps out a little bit. And that lifestyle creep is the reason why you don't get ahead. It's got nothing to do with your income levels. In fact, if I was to describe most of my clients, they probably are best described as being comfortably inefficient. Not particularly bad with any one cost category, just not awesome with any of them either. And when conditions are harder, you have got to be stronger and you've got to be better so your outcome is more awesome. We can't drift towards financial success. Those days are long gone. They probably ended 2 generations ago. We're actually trying to navigate a bit of a riptide. And I don't know if anyone's ever floated down a river on a tube or tried to cross a riptide. Your technique is very different, right? So I'm going to show you some of the techniques that we apply with our clients shortly. But your cash resilience, if you're going to say that you are resilient financially, you would have access to 6 months of your living costs. Now, that could be in cash. That definitely would be the purest way of demonstrating that. But you could also access that through credit if you needed it, overdraft if you had to, even being able to access it through the bank of mum and dad. I'm not judging, but you've got to be resilient before you start to grow wealth, right? Before you, I guess, take a seat at the table, you've got to have your basics in place. And to be honest, even though the conditions are harder, we are also a little more useless when it comes to ensuring a better financial outcome. And I guess you do it, you grow wealth, you get your money working harder to be financially successful. And financial success can mean different things to different people, depending usually of where you're starting at in your journey will be the best determinant of what financial success is likely to be. So if you're just getting started, financial success might be just to build up your cash resilience, to get rid of your student loan faster, or just to increase your rate of savings. That could be financial success for you for that particular milestone. Or it could be, if we want to go a next step higher, we want to be positioning you so you can purchase a property or own a car, or be able to fund a holiday without using credit, or be able to go down to one income and still be able to fund your lifestyle if your family's growing. Those are kind of the entry level success measures. But when you've got your home, it's a step up, right? The success is, how can I get you mortgage free as quickly as possible? Or if you've got a mortgage, how can I use your equity to grow wealth as fast as possible? Could I position you to get an investment property? Could I position you to get 2 investment properties? Could we be growing wealth? Should we be using managed funds? Should we consider other types of wealth strategies? These are all the things that you want to be able to work towards as you move through your different financial milestones. And we've got people in our team that specialize in helping you get over the hump of your particular milestone and on to the next one. But most of us, instead of thinking about financial success, can probably relate more to the definition of poor. And all poor means is when there is too much month left at the end of your money. Your money doesn't quite stretch far enough, or you're living payday to payday. You might be living comfortably payday to payday, but you're still not making the progress that your income suggests you should be able to make. And as a starter for 10, you want to be able to save at least 20% of your income. That's as a starter. Now, of course, we want you to be saving more. And for some people who aren't saving anything, just getting to that 20% is going to be hard. But I'm going to show you some of the things that we work through to do that. What I can say for you, though, is financial success has to be designed for you. It's got to be relevant to your goals, your values, where you're at in life, what you've got to play with, right? So financial success for someone who's already on the who perhaps is age 50, success for them might be on track to be mortgage free, making sure I would have grown enough wealth to fund my retirement, maybe to have helped the kids into a property as well. That might be financial success for them. For someone who's 25, that might be very different, right? So it comes down to your timeframes, the hand of cards you've been dealt, and whether you know how to play that hand in order to win. Financial success is determined by your behavior, your wealth mindset, whether you've got the right strategies, systems, whether you're financially literate, and perhaps most importantly, whether you have the ability to execute and sustain behaviors even with headwinds. I think anyone can be good on a good day. Anyone can save for something they want, provided it's quite small and won't take too much sacrifice. Anyone can do that. But financial success is so much more than that. But what is interesting in the list of things that drive that outcome, your income levels aren't at the top, right? There is no point earning more income if you don't have the right behaviors, if you don't have the right mindset or the right strategy. All you're doing is pouring more money into the pipes, but it's just coming out the bottom. So what I can tell you, financial success, because you've got to know this, right? Financial success is harder to achieve if you are a shopper. It's not impossible, it's just harder. It means that your tendencies aren't naturally helping you. That doesn't mean much beyond the fact we need to apply a different strategy. If your income is inconsistent, we need a different strategy. If you don't have a strategy or a plan, it's going to be hard to achieve anything. And if you don't have accountability to that plan, and that accountability has got to be wider than your friends or family, although that helps in the absence of anything, you're unlikely, or it becomes harder to achieve. So best you call out the risks, right? So we can then work out, well, what are we going to do about it? Financial success is 80% behavior, 20% strategy. 80% behavior comes down to your financial health. What are your tendencies when it comes to money? So if you go back to kind of your early high school science class, if you're going to try and create momentum with anything, you want to remove the friction points, the things that naturally slow that momentum down. Now, your behavior is one of the biggest friction points to creating forward financial momentum. And it starts with your money personality. You are either a saver or a spender or a shopper. You could be somewhere in between, which is a plodder. Now, depending on your personality, there is a different strategy to unlock better outcomes for you. The more effortless the strategy, the more likely you will be able to sustain it, right? The reduced friction, the greater the thrust. So if you're a saver, that means you find it easy to save. You enjoy saving. You enjoy seeing your money go up in value. You don't enjoy spending. In fact, you need a reason to spend. In the absence of a reason, you will just happily save. Without a doubt, if you are a saver, that is a head start. That is an advantage. It doesn't get you to the goal, but you definitely have the inside lane to start with. A spender, on the other hand, doesn't get excited or enthused by saving. I'm a spender. I can save. It's not that I can't. It's just you've got to give me a good reason to. And if you can't give me a good reason, I find it easier to spend. I don't want to be reckless with my money, but I do enjoy being generous. And in fact, because I feel like I have more than others, I want to be generous. It's possibly part of my values. But you'll be somewhere in there. It gets interesting when you introduce your partner, right? Because you've got your saver coupled with a saver, so they tend to be quite tight. Sort of annoying if they're in your group of friends, but they are there. You've got your spender or shopper combo. They are looking good, going nowhere, but having an awesome time. My gran used to call that person big hat, no cattle, or fur coat, no knickers, or paddling hard, but going nowhere, right? So then you've got that interesting combo, which gets more towards relationship counseling, which is the saver coupled with the spender. And that's when neither party really get what they want. You're not really making progress, but you're not also able to enjoy your spending. So it's kind of cute when you first get together, and then it just gets a bit annoying for everyone. But that's the first layer of your money health. And it's just to do with your tendencies, right? You can't reprogram yourself. You are what you are. You've just got to play to them or work out how can you combat them. Then you've got your willpower tendency. Everyone wants to be financially successful, or no one wants to be a financial failure, yet less than 2% are on track to be financially successful. It's not without wanting or willing it to be the case. It's just willpower is a muscle, and a muscle gets fatigued by doing all these other things before you even get to your financial health. So you don't really know the effectiveness of your willpower until you are time poor and you have conflicting objectives, and with those conflicting objectives, which one naturally elevates? Is it your financial goals or not? And usually it's not. Usually your financial goals are right at the bottom of the pile once you've made sure that your boss is happy with you, and your partner's doing okay, and the kids are okay, and the house is tidy, and you've done your exercise. Maybe you'll get to your financial goals, but most of us just don't have the energy to get there. And financial success is deliberate. It requires a couple of hours each week trying to drive an outcome if you're not used to doing that yourself. You know, when you can bring in an expert, you can narrow down your time required. But even with the clients we work with, we still want them to invest no less than 15 minutes of their time every week doing what we need them to do, because we're trying to drive an outcome that we are accountable to. But if we come back to this willpower, I'll try and bring this to life. Let's say you set yourself a goal. So it's an internal goal. It's something you hold dear, which let's say I want to train for a marathon. That's a goal. I'm committed to that goal. And then you've got an external goal, which is what your boss might give you. That's something like you need to do this thing before you leave for the day, this particular task. And that requires you to work late. But this task is an external goal. It's been given to you. And let's say one particular evening, that was the only time you could go for a run. Your boss has asked you to work late to do something, and you wanted to go for your run. You can only choose one. Which of those two things do you naturally elevate? Because it's not that you don't want to go for a run. It's not that you're not willing it to happen. There is just a natural obstacle that has gotten in the way. Now, if you are an upholder, that is someone who will elevate their internal goals above external requirements. They tend to be high performance athletes, which is the positive of that. But they're focused, they're disciplined, and they will happily say no to any other force that gets in their way, including those who we would naturally consider are more superior to us, like our boss. If you are a rebel, which is the other extreme, you don't have an internal goal and you don't appreciate anyone giving you a goal either. Now, that tends to be a teenager, and you hope that that person grows out of it. They don't always. But an example, I'll say to my son, Cameron, who's 15, I'll say, Cam, do you want to walk to school or do you want to bike to school? And his reply will be, I don't want to go to school. Right? So rebels are annoying. They are very difficult to parent. They are difficult to manage. And if you're a financial rebel, it is unlikely you will be financially successful unless you can bring yourself to be accountable to a plan. Then you've got a questioner, who is someone who will do something if it makes sense to do something. So in that example we were talking about earlier, a questioner is going to say, look, the shareholders that I needed to send this report to are traveling tonight. They're not even going to get it. I can go for my run. I can send the report out later, and the outcome would have been no worse if I had done it that particular way. So a questioner, it's exhausting to be a questioner. 70% of us, though, and you've just got to clock this, are obligers, which means we find it easier to oblige other people before we get round to our own goals. The fastest way to hack your natural tendency, if you are an obliger, is to make your personal goal something that you can be accountable to someone externally. So if I want to go to the gym and I'm lousy at getting to the gym, I would have a personal trainer. If I'm trying to achieve financial goals, I would work with a financial personal trainer in order to get those goals. It's not because I don't get the logic behind it, but things get in the way that makes it hard for me to elevate a particular goal, even though that goal is important to me. So you've got to be aware of that. Then we come to your money strategy. Are you risk adverse? Does it frighten you to take action? Which is someone often who is a saver, right? So a saver has the advantage initially, but if they can't accompany that with a strategy to grow wealth and get their money working harder, they lose their advantage. An adventurer is someone who wants a big financial goal. Almost the bigger, the better for them. Often it is a shopper who is also an adventurer. So again, the shopper had the setback with not finding it easier to save, but what shoppers are great at doing is achieving big financial goals. They need that in order to focus on the detail. So a shopper will be great at paying down their mortgage faster, about positioning themselves to buy an investment property as quickly as possible. They will do what's needed to get that outcome, even if that requires kind of looking at the day-to-day numbers, but they would never be energized by looking at those day-to-day numbers without that big goal. Now, it's really important if you're an adventurer that you've got the right goal, you know the time frame to get you to that goal and the levels or the levers that you need to pull or the sequence of actions you need to fulfill to get maximum thrust. And a dreamer is someone who believes that the universe will provide and it will be okay in the end. A dreamer makes a wonderful friend, a terrible financial strategy. In fact, I can probably save you a couple of $100,000 now. Don't marry a shopper who is a rebel and a dreamer. It will end in tears for everyone. But this is to do with your money psychology. Let's understand this first so we can determine the right strategy for you. For many people, they don't know, although they hope for better outcomes, they don't actually believe it is possible. And that's to do more with their mindset and their upbringing around money. And you tend to have, you either inadvertently follow in your parents' footsteps or you have an allergic reaction to their money behaviors. I had a client yesterday that I was talking to that they grew up in a family where it was quite tight financially, and the parents would say no to doing things if there was no money to do things. And that sort of scarred him. And so his philosophy now is, I never want my children to feel, because it's interesting how you rationalize it, that we can't do things simply because there is no money. So I'm like, well, kind of do want them to feel that. He says, I want to be able to spend money and I believe that I'll be able to solve the problem or create an opportunity for myself. And it's like, and so for him, he's actually a spender with a lot of debt because he's having an allergic reaction to what the environment to which he grew up in. Now, that mindset has a really big impact on how we set our strategy. But if we come to your cash position now, so you're either sinking, floating, or flying. Now, sinking means you're going backwards. You've got short-term debt. You're not paying it off as quickly as you can or not in full each month. Floating means you're not going backwards. You're just not getting ahead particularly fast. And flying means you're saving at least 20%. Now, depending on where you are starting, and you'll know where you are. If you're sinking, the objective is to stabilize your situation. We've got to do a bit of a detox. We've got to go hard. We're going without, nil by mouth, as it were, in order to get rid of debts as quickly as possible. It is not comfortable, but it needs to be done. We're trying to get you to this floating stage. And when we're at floating, we're trying to optimize what we've got. We're trying to get rid of all those inefficiencies so that we can lift your savings rate, because once we lift your savings rate, that unlocks many doors for us. It builds your resilience. It allows you to save or grow wealth towards your goal. If you've got a mortgage, we can pay it off faster. If you've got short-term debt, we can pay it off faster, which creates equity that we can then use to grow wealth outside of your savings. And the idea then is to get you saving at least 20% of your income so you get to this flying level. And when we're flying, we can then maximize. And when you're maximizing, that is about getting your money working as hard as possible for you, not just you working hard. So depending on where you are, we've got different strategies. We've got different programs that we work to because there are different outcomes that are needed within a particular time frame for those programs. If you've got short-term debt or those that are sinking, so sinking usually, to evidence sinking, you've got buy now, pay later owing, or you've got credit cards or you've got personal loans. There are ways to get through that, but normally it does require quite deliberate actions with a clear plan to follow that we're tracking against and you are held accountable to. It is not easy, but it is doable. And it is one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself is to take you from sinking to floating. It is hard, though, from a behavioral perspective. We're needing to unlearn behaviors, teach you new behaviors and habits, and accompany that with the wraparound support so you stay within the guardrails so we can achieve some outcomes for you. No matter where you're at, we're trying to maximize your cash surplus. So there's this concept in economics called the law of diminishing returns, where it says the more you consume of something, the better you are to a particular point, but you hit a point and then it starts to, you become less better off each turn. And so if I relate that to money, the more money you spend, the happier you are until you hit a particular point, and you can keep spending money and it's not going to make you any happier. And in fact, if you keep spending money, you might actually feel a little uncomfortable. So the idea with any financial plan is to give you enough room to spend money on the things that make you happy, but to understand the sensitivity of the spending. So at what point do you start to get a reduced return? And at that point, that is when you start to fritter your money. Now, we know that on average, Kiwis fritter 15% of their income. So I'm talking about the excess money that is spent after you are happy. This is not about going without so you can't be happy. It's about once you hit that point, being really sensitive to it. I'll give you an example. If I have a cup of coffee a day, I feel good. If I have 2 cups of coffee a day, I feel a bit better, a bit more perkier, maybe 1.5 times better. And if I have 3 cups of coffee a day, I actually feel sick. So for me, the optimum coffee consumption is actually 1.5 cups of coffee. If I consume beyond that point, that is when I'm starting to fritter. So when we're designing your plans, we're trying to understand, well, what are the things that do make you happy? And you'll have 2 or 3 things, and that might be socializing with your friends. It could be a cleaner. It could be art supplies or Xbox games. I don't know. It'll be different for different people and probably different genders. But based on those, let's make sure we've allocated for those, and then let's work out where we're frittering money everywhere else. And I can tell you the most common forms of fritter is what we spend on food is the most common form of overspend, where we're just inefficient. We spend a little bit more than what we think, a little more regularly than we clock across all those food categories. And that is irrespective of where you're at in your life stage. That is one of the most common fritters. The next level of fritter is on our fixed costs. We don't tend to shop around because who can be bothered, but there's normally about 10% of inefficiencies between providers. If you've got a mortgage, your interest costs, your mortgage won't be structured correctly, and that's what's going to unlock or ensure that you pay way more to the bank than what you needed to, which is kind of a topic for a different day, but optimizing your mortgage is critical if you're trying to maximize your progress. What you spend on or how you structure your KiwiSaver contributions, your insurance payments are also other areas where it's really easy to make them inefficient, and inefficiency is a form of fritter. So we want to remove the fritter in a way so that you're still doing the things that make you happy, but not wasting your time on the things that don't. I just also want to talk about the definition of a couple of words. We don't tend to use the word budget at Enable Me because a budget is just numbers on a spreadsheet. We're wanting to know, how are you tracking against those numbers? What behaviors are we going to change in order to change that outcome? And then what doors get unlocked off the back of it? So we're about dynamic progress. I've had one client that's come to me and she's bought 7 years worth of her spending records. And she's like, well, I can tell you what I spend. And I'm like, yeah, you can, but you're spending more than what you need to. So you're not telling me how much in excess you're spending. You're just telling me that in the absence of a plan, you spend to this level. I'm not interested in what you do when you don't have a plan. I want to know when you do have a plan and support and the right systems and applications supporting you, and your mindset has been shifted and you are reaching higher, what are you capable of? Because my job is to unlock that, which is really different than just numbers on a page, right? And when you do have money, we then got to say, well, what do we do with that money? And again, it's going to depend on your life stage. If you're just getting started, you're going to need to clear your debt. If you haven't cleared your debt, then we need to be saving and investing, most likely in a managed fund, so that we can build up enough money so that we can buy a property. Whether that's a home or an investment property is not the point of today's conversation, but I need to get you onto the property ladder. The reason I need to get you onto the property ladder is property grows, your money invested in property grows 300% more than money invested in an asset that doesn't have a mortgage attached to it. It's to do with leverage, which is the bank's money that comes into the equation. It's not really because property is amazing. So I'll just give you an example. If you had $100,000, you could put that in the bank and you might get a 4% return. You could put that into a managed fund, you might get a 6 or 7% return. You could put it into property, maybe you get a similar return with property. Or you could put it into shares, whatever the case is. But with the $100,000, you're not going to buy a $100,000 property. You're going to take that $100,000, you're going to borrow from the bank $400,000, and you're going to buy a $500,000 property. The rent you receive on that mortgage, on that property, is going to pay off the mortgage. There might be a shortfall that you've got to top up. I understand all of those things. But the gain on that $500,000 asset, even if it was at the same percentage as a managed fund, is still 300% greater than the managed fund because it's on a higher asset value. Whether you believe in property or not, believe in leverage. And so the objective, if we're going to try and get your money working harder, is to get you onto the property ladder as quickly as possible. Once you're on the property ladder, ironically, we want to get rid of the mortgage as quickly as possible so you don't pay unnecessary costs to the bank, and to create equity in that property. Now, there's a whole kind of module on how we create wealth for you. But depending on whether you're on the ladder or not, we've got a different strategy. If you're not on the ladder, we've got to use managed funds so that we can get your money working hard while we save a big enough deposit to get you onto the property ladder. If you're on the property ladder, we then need to focus on getting an investment property so we can pay the mortgage off faster and prepare for retirement. Once we've done that, we then want to diversify back into managed funds. So the different assets or asset types will play different roles depending on the life stage that you're at, and they've got different functions based on those life stages. This here just shows you the difference. So as a quick visual, over the last 10 years, the red line is the growth you get from property. So this is saying if you had $100,000 invested in a term deposit in shares like Briscoe's or the stock exchange generally, or property, over the last 10 years, you can see that for the same investment week on week in those assets, the red is the difference of property. And some people say, well, is it still worth owning a home when you can rent? I think it makes a lot of sense to rent, to be honest. But you've still got to be on the property ladder, which means you own investment properties and you yourself rent. In fact, some of our wealthiest assets, that's their strategy. They rent pretty spectacular houses, but it's cheaper for them to rent that property rather than to own it and tie up all their capital. And instead, they might have a huge portfolio of investment properties. But if you are going to rent instead of owning your home at some point, you just need to be mindful that you need to save almost another $800,000 towards your retirement fund before retirement to cover your rent costs during retirement. So I guess the essence of that is it is still worth owning your home. We just want to sequence it correctly. I don't think your home should be the first property that you purchase. I think the first property that you purchase should actually be an investment property in most instances. And perhaps joining forces with a friend or a colleague to both get you onto that property as a tactical stepping stone makes a lot of sense. We then want to use the capital growth on that property to buy a second property. And it could be that the third property is your home. And if you buy, because back in the day, what our grandparents would have said was make sure the first property you buy is your home. And that was true for them, but the conditions make it unproductive for us in the current environment. But let's kind of keep it going, then I'll take some questions in a second. Key takeaways. It's less to do with your income, more to do with your financial BMI or your financial tendencies as to whether you're going to be financially successful. It doesn't matter where you naturally lean, but just appreciate that where you lean will require a particular strategy to put in place to either maximize or take advantage of the tendency or to combat that. Now, usually, if you're combating something, you need a degree of accountability to make sure you sustain that. When you fritter money, 15% of do a back of an envelope calculation on 15% of your income. That will be on average what you fritter. We know that. We're trying to maximize your cash surplus. On average, we increase the savings rates of our clients, I think, by about 500%, significantly. We grow their wealth significantly. If they've got a mortgage, we try and get them mortgage. If they don't have a mortgage, we try and get them on the property ladder within 2 years. If they do have a mortgage, we try and get them mortgage free in 10 years rather than 30. And if they're not on track for retirement, we also want to position them normally to create $1 million of wealth, right? And this happens because we are deliberate with how we design the plan for your particular tendencies to take advantage of who you are and what you're not. So we're still going to bank the result for you. Depending on your life stage, there will be a different requirement or sequence of actions. So don't just kind of apply a general rule to you. It's about understanding who you are, what you're not, what you've got to work with, what are your trump cards, and how to play those well. If you were working with, we call ourselves financial personal trainers. If you were working with us as your financial personal trainer, our job is to diagnose your starting point and assess your capability. Some of you are sinking, so we don't have much to work with, and we've got to actually build up a base fitness before we can start to make progress. Some of you are doing pretty good, and we can sharpen your focus, and some of you are already financially fit, so your cash flow is really good. Now it's a case of how do we maximize that for you. We want to design a strategy that will grow wealth, but what your wealth is depends on where you're at in your life milestones. We want to build a buffer so we can minimize risk. Normally we work to a 5-year plan, and we're going to help with the heavy lifting with whatever that plan requires. If you do want to come to a consultation, that cost of the consultation is normally $400, but it has been discounted to alumni to $149. You just need to redeem that discount by Friday. You don't need to have the session by Friday. You've got a couple of months to have the session, but you just need to have redeemed it by Friday. So I think that's my last slide. Yep, we're on to Q&A. So over to you, Bronte.
Thanks so much, Hannah. We've had a heap of questions come through, so we won't be able to have time to get to all of them, but I'm just going to go with the questions that have the most thumbs up. So our first one is, home ownership seems completely out of my reach. What are your thoughts on renting for life and investing in the stock market to get ahead? I know you touched on this before, but maybe just expand a little.
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult for you to have saved enough for your retirement if you don't eventually own your home and have yourself mortgage free on that home. And the reason for that is if we can get you mortgage free by retirement, you're not going to have accommodation costs in retirement because you don't have to pay rent or you don't have to pay your mortgage down. If you're still renting, you've got to allow that rental cost every year. So if it's $600 a week for the 25 years of retirement, that's another $800,000 you are going to have to save. So that's unlikely you will be able to do that. So then we come back to it and we say, well, renting might be okay, but I need your wealth working harder. So should I put your money in the stock market, a managed fund, or property? Property will outperform those other asset classes any day of the week, often by up to 300%. So the question is, how can we get you onto the property ladder? The hardest part of getting onto the property ladder is the deposit. Most of us don't have the deposit we need. So we've got to get creative around how can we save more or position you so that you can get on faster. There are a few ways to skin that cat, and we spend quite a bit of time with people at that point of that particular milestone or that life stage. But you don't have to live in the property as your home, but you will need to benefit from leverage if you're going to try and close out your retirement gap, especially if you've taken on a student loan.
Awesome, thank you. We've got a couple minutes left for one last question. So our second thumbs up one is it better to pay off my mortgage first and then invest for the future, or should you invest at the same time?
We prefer to invest at the same time, but that does create some risk and it does start to put cash flow pressure on the rest of the plan. So we don't do that until we know you're as resilient as you possibly can be. But normally we focus on paying down the mortgage and simultaneously using that equity in order to buy an investment property, perhaps. The reason we're going for an investment property rather than managed funds is I'm not wanting to slow down the pace that I pay off the mortgage. If I redirect my money into a managed fund, I'm taking it from the money that was going to pay off my mortgage. So the reason we like property while you've still got a mortgage is we're using the equity in your home in order to secure the investment property. It's not actually increasing your home mortgage, so you can continue to do both things at the same time. The risk, though, is that not all properties are created equal. There is a huge range of outcomes you can expect to get from each property. And you've got to be really scientific and calculated with what is the criteria you need that property to solve for you. So if you're trying to, say, grow $500,000 of wealth and you've got $800,000 to spend on a property, this is all just hypothetical, what is the capital growth rate you need on that property to give you your $500,000 of gain over the next 5 to 10 years? That growth rate is going to tell you what is the region you should be investing in, the type of property, whether it's attached or standalone, the number of bedrooms, and the yield. And you've got to be that specific if you're going to try and solve a problem. Now, I don't tend to put effort in unless I'm going to solve the problem because I can't be bothered. And I wouldn't expect my clients to do something unless it was going to actually change the outcomes. Not when it comes to financial planning, Kiwis are not particularly good at articulating what the problem is and the size of the problem and the time frame they've got to solve the problem. And because of that, they don't know what their strategies are that they should consider. As a rough rule of thumb, if the problem you're trying to solve is more than $300,000 wide, you're going to need to benefit from leverage. It's not because I like property. There's different types of ways you can cut that. It's just because you're not going to solve your problem. So our job is to be honest with our clients around where they're starting from, to show them where their inefficiencies are, to help them unlock those inefficiencies, and ultimately to get their money working harder. And if we do that right over a 10-year period, we're going to try and create $1 million of difference between what they were on track to do through their drifting and what could be achieved through deliberate, elegant execution. Okay, well, I think we've closed off what we need to here. So thank you very much for having me. I hope you're brave enough to have a session and we start to work with you to create a wonderful financial future for you.